Michael Jackson walked into the lobby of the upscale hotel, his presence understated, his fame hidden beneath a simple hoodie and jeans. He wasn't drawing attention, but there was something unmistakably unique about him, even in his low-profile disguise. The hotel, as elegant as they come, was home to the elite. The polished marble floors gleamed, and the chandeliers shimmered above, casting light on a space that whispered luxury at every turn. But despite the grandeur of the place, it was just another day at the desk for Jessica, the young receptionist. She stood behind the counter, her posture straight, her smile wide, and her attitude even wider. She was confident, perhaps too confident, judging each guest who walked through the door based on their appearance. And when she saw Michael, she saw nothing more than a regular guest. Jessica looked him over quickly, taking in his casual attire, the relaxed way he carried himself, and instantly pegged him as someone who clearly didn't belong in the world of polished marble and high-end rooms. Probably a tourist who can't afford the suite, she thought. She didn't know who he really was, and frankly, she didn't care. To her, he was just another face among many, just another person checking in. She didn't have time to be starstruck. She had work to do, after all. Michael stood there, perhaps noticing the brief moment of judgment in Jessica's eyes, but he kept quiet, simply awaiting his turn. Unaware of the man standing in front of her, Jessica carried on, oblivious to the fact that this wasn't just any guest. It was the king of pop himself, one of the most famous figures in the world, who had recently bought the very hotel she was working at. As Michael stood there, patiently waiting, Jessica's assumptions began to boil over into snide remarks. She glanced up at him, took in his casual clothes, and couldn't help but make a comment. "I'm sorry, sir, but we usually reserve the luxury suites for guests who can afford them. You'll have to settle for something more appropriate for your style," she said, clearly letting her judgment seep into her tone. Michael raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. Instead, he remained calm, as though he had heard this kind of thing 1,000 times before. Jessica wasn't finished, though. She continued with a snicker. "It's really a shame when people who clearly don't belong here try to take up space in places like this. But, hey, we've got rooms that fit every budget." She typed away on her keyboard, clicking away, oblivious to the subtle tension building. The receptionist was on autopilot, assuming the man before her was just another average guest, beneath the high standards of the hotel. Michael, swallowing the momentary sting of her words, leaned forward slightly, still smiling. "Actually, I'm just looking for a bit of privacy," he said in a calm, almost amused voice. "Is there any chance I could get the presidential suite?" But Jessica didn't register his words. With a haughty flick of her wrist, she pushed aside any possibility of a luxurious room, typing away before offering him what she clearly thought was the best she could do. "Well, we've got a nice budget room down the hall," she replied, completely ignoring the potential awkwardness of her offer. Michael just nodded, his calmness belying the situation. It wasn't his first run-in with people who underestimated him, but this time, it was all a bit more comical. He didn't bother to correct her again, letting her ramble on, making the situation even more awkward for herself. She was too caught up in her own judgments to even notice that the man she was humiliating was actually the very owner of the hotel. As the day wore on, Michael quietly observed the operations of the hotel, walking through the lobby with a quiet confidence. He took note of the little things, the service, the way the staff interacted with guests, the overall atmosphere of the place he had recently acquired. His low-key presence was nothing out of the ordinary. He was just another guest, blending into the background as he moved through the spaces he now owned. Meanwhile, Jessica continued her duties at the front desk, never once questioning the man she had brushed aside earlier. She treated him like any other guest, not knowing she had just humiliated the very person she should have been showing the utmost respect to. It wasn't until she overheard a conversation between two staff members that everything began to change. One of the bellboys, casually mentioning his boss, the new owner of the hotel, caught Jessica's attention. The words hit her like a ton of bricks. Michael Jackson, the same man she had belittled earlier, assuming he was beneath the hotel's standards, was the very person who owned the place. Her heart sank. The truth dawned on her, and the realization sent a flush of embarrassment across her face. She had treated the owner like a lowly guest, humiliating him in front of staff, offering him a budget room and dismissing his presence without a second thought. Jessica's face turned pale as she quickly turned her head toward the lobby. She caught sight of Michael, standing confidently as he casually chatted with a few other staff members, clearly in his element. He had been watching everything unfold, observing how she treated him with disdain, how she thought he was just another average guest. Michael, now aware of her realization, approached the desk with a slow, deliberate step. He paused in front of Jessica, his eyes glinting with a mix of amusement and authority. Without missing a beat, he calmly said, "You know, I don't usually mind a bit of criticism, but I do believe you were offering me the wrong room earlier. It's a little too humble for my tastes. I'm more of a luxury suite kind of guy." Jessica's eyes widened in horror, her earlier bravado evaporating instantly. She stammered, unsure of what to say, feeling utterly humiliated. Michael's nonchalant tone made it clear that he had no intention of making her feel sorry for her actions. He was simply allowing her to realize the depth of her mistake. With a smile that barely hid his amusement, Michael added, "I'll let you know. I'm the owner here. Maybe next time, you could try treating your guests with a little more respect." The words were sharp, but his calm delivery only added to the sting. The receptionist, flustered and panicked, could only nod apologetically, her face burning with embarrassment. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on her. She had just been schooled by the very person she had so carelessly dismissed. The tension in the air was palpable as Jessica stood frozen at the front desk, still processing the magnitude of her mistake. Michael, calm and composed, didn't let the situation escalate. He could have easily made her feel humiliated, but instead, he allowed her to stew in the discomfort of her own ignorance. He knew that this moment was an opportunity for growth, not just for Jessica, but for everyone in the room. Jessica, who had been brimming with confidence just moments ago, now seemed smaller, a woman suddenly aware of her own mistakes. Her professional mask of arrogance had cracked, and in its place was a vulnerable young woman, grappling with the reality that the man she had just humiliated was none other than the hotel's owner. She stammered, trying to find her words, but they came out halting and unsure. I'm so sorry. I didn't know who you were. I just assumed, and I didn't mean to be rude, but..." She trailed off, her words hanging in the air, more hollow by the second. Michael didn't react immediately. He simply looked at her, allowing the weight of the moment to sink in. The silence between them felt heavy, thick with unspoken thoughts. Jessica's apology had no real substance because she was apologizing more out of embarrassment than true understanding. She had wronged him, not just as a guest, but as a human being, and that realization was hitting her hard. "I understand," Michael said slowly, his voice steady but firm. "But it's not about who I am, Jessica. It's about how you treated me." He paused, allowing her to process his words. "You made an assumption based on the way I look, based on how I was dressed. And because of that assumption, you treated me poorly. That's something that can't be taken back with an apology." Jessica's face flushed with a deep red, the embarrassment clear in her eyes. She opened her mouth to say something, but Michael raised his hand slightly to stop her. "I'm not angry with you," he continued, "but you need to understand this. When you're in a position like this, when you're interacting with people from all walks of life, you can't afford to make assumptions. You can't treat people differently because of how they look or how they appear to you. That's not how we build a respectful environment here." Jessica stood there, humbled. It was clear that Michael wasn't going to lash out. Instead, he was teaching her a lesson, one that would stick with her far longer than any reprimand could. She realized, for the first time, that her job wasn't just to check in guests and process payments. It was to treat every person with dignity, regardless of who they were or what they wore. But Michael wasn't done yet. He saw this as a moment to not just educate Jessica, but to address something more fundamental. A shift in mindset that could ripple through the entire hotel. That afternoon, Michael called for a staff meeting. The employees, including Jessica, filed into the conference room, whispering among themselves. The tension was thick in the air, and everyone knew why. Jessica had made a mistake. But what they didn't know was that this mistake would lead to a lesson in humility and respect. As the staff settled into their seats, Michael walked to the front of the room. The employees who had been there for years recognized him, but many were still unsure about how to interact with the new owner. There were rumors circulating, but none of them could have anticipated what was coming. "I don't want to stand here and lecture you," Michael began, his voice calm but commanding. "But today, something happened that we need to address. Something that I think is important for all of us to reflect on." The room went quiet. Jessica sat at the back, her eyes wide, knowing exactly where this conversation was headed. She wanted to shrink into the chair, but Michael had made it clear. This wasn't just about her. This was about all of them. We all know that people come to this hotel from all walks of life. Some guests come in business suits, others in jeans. But it doesn't matter what they wear or who they are. They deserve the same respect. If we treat some guests differently based on their appearance, then we are failing in our duty to them. Our duty as service providers is to make everyone feel welcomed, regardless of what they're wearing or how they look. I don't care if they're wearing designer clothes or just coming from a local coffee shop. Every guest is important. The words hung in the air, and the staff exchanged glances, the weight of Michael's message settling over them. Michael looked directly at Jessica as he spoke, though he wasn't singling her out. His gaze simply conveyed understanding. He had given her a second chance, and now it was time to make sure this lesson was internalized by everyone. "I'm not angry at anyone here," Michael continued, "but I want us to reflect on how we treat people, not based on their wealth or status, but on their humanity. If we don't, then we risk losing sight of what this place is really about. We're not just providing a service. We're providing an experience. And that experience should be one of respect and kindness." The room remained silent for a moment, the employees reflecting on Michael's words. Jessica, who was still sitting at the back of the room, felt a lump in her throat. She realized just how far removed she had been from truly understanding her role. She had been wrapped up in judgments and assumptions, thinking she could pick and choose who deserved respect and who didn't. Michael continued, his tone softer now. "Let this be a lesson not just for Jessica, but for all of us. We need to remember that respect is earned through actions, not appearances. Every single guest who walks into this hotel deserves to be treated with the same level of courtesy and respect." As the meeting ended, Michael's words lingered in the air. Jessica, still reeling from the lesson, left the room with her head down, but there was a sense of gratitude in her heart. She now understood how important it was to treat everyone with dignity, regardless of their status or appearance. The following weeks at the hotel were different. There was a new atmosphere among the staff. They were more careful about their interactions with guests, more respectful, and more aware of how their actions could impact the experience of those they served. Jessica, in particular, worked harder to prove herself. She treated every guest with care, greeting them warmly, making sure their needs were met without judgment. It was a process for her, but she began to see the impact of her change in attitude. Guests who once seemed unimportant to her now became the focus of her attention. She learned to listen to them, to see them not for what they wore or how much money they had, but for who they were as people. Michael's lesson had done more than change the way the staff treated their guests. It had changed the entire culture of the hotel. The staff learned that true service wasn't just about providing the best amenities or the most luxurious rooms. It was about creating an experience where everyone felt valued, no matter who they were. As for Michael, he didn't seek recognition for his actions. He didn't need to. The change in the hotel's atmosphere was his reward. He knew that by addressing the issue head-on, He had not only taught Jessica a valuable lesson, but he had instilled a culture of respect that would reverberate throughout the hotel for years to come. As the days went by, the atmosphere at the hotel began to shift, and the impact of Michael's lesson became clear. Jessica, once brimming with arrogance, now carried herself with more humility and a sense of duty to treat every guest with respect, regardless of their appearance. She no longer made assumptions based on outward appearances, and in doing so, she found herself connecting with the guests in a way she never had before. One morning, Michael was preparing to leave the hotel after a short stay. He had spent the past few days watching the staff, including Jessica, and he could see that the lesson had stuck. The hotel, once a place where judgments ran rampant, had transformed into a space where kindness and respect were now the currency. Michael knew it was time for him to go, but before he left, he wanted to leave one last mark on the hotel, not in the form of an extravagant gesture, but in a simple message. Michael quietly approached the reception desk, where Jessica was now greeting guests with a warm smile. She looked up as he approached, a bit unsure of what to expect. The moment he stepped up to the desk, she immediately straightened her posture, her eyes reflecting a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. She had been working hard to undo the damage of her earlier behavior, but there was still that lingering guilt. Without a word, Michael placed a small envelope on the desk. Jessica's curiosity got the better of her, and she opened the envelope. Inside, she found a note, handwritten by Michael himself. The words were simple, yet powerful. True wealth is not measured by what we have, but by how we treat others. Humility and kindness are the keys to everything that truly matters. Thank you for learning this lesson. The note, written in Michael's familiar, elegant handwriting, struck a chord in Jessica's heart. Her eyes welled up as she read the words over and over again, understanding the depth of what he was saying. He wasn't just reminding her of her mistake. He was showing her a way forward, a way to be a better person, not just a better employee. As she looked up, she saw Michael standing there, watching her with a calm expression. He gave her a small nod before turning to leave, his footsteps soft on the polished floor. Jessica stood frozen for a moment, holding the note tightly in her hands, overwhelmed by the sincerity of Michael's gesture. In the days that followed, the entire hotel staff carried on with their daily tasks, but there was a noticeable change in the air. Conversations seemed more genuine, smiles more sincere, and the guests began to feel more comfortable, knowing that they were in a place where they wouldn't be judged for how they looked. The staff treated every guest with the same level of care, and the hotel became known not just for its luxury, but for its warmth and respect. For Jessica, the transformation was personal. She no longer saw her guests as mere customers, but as human beings, each with their own story, their own struggles, and their own value. She realized that wealth wasn't about how much money someone had in their pocket. It was about how rich their character was, how much they cared for others. As the story came to a close, the message was clear. Michael Jackson's presence had left an indelible mark on the hotel, not because of his fame, but because of his wisdom. He had taught everyone there the true measure of wealth: kindness, respect, and humility. And as Jessica continued to greet guests with a smile, she silently thanked Michael for changing her life. She would never again judge a person by their clothes, their accent, or their appearance. She had learned that the richest people were those who treated others with dignity, no matter who they were or where they came from. As for Michael, he may have left the hotel, but his influence lingered long after. The staff, now a unified team, continued to embody the values he had instilled in them. The lesson of humility and respect lived on, ensuring that the hotel remained a place where everyone, regardless of their status, was welcomed with open arms and treated with the kindness they deserved. If you enjoyed this heartfelt story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more amazing tales. Your support keeps us going.